This podcast is supported by the original organic bedding and bath brand, Koyuchi.
Koyuchi has spent 35 years pioneering quality organic textiles, long before the word organic became, trendy. But words matter to Koyuchi. Words like craftsmanship, longevity, and wellness. So what does the word wellness mean to Koyuchi? It means that all of our products are absolutely free from harsh chemicals and dangerous toxins that can seep into your skin. It means effortless style that looks as good as it feels with naturally breathable, pre-washed organic cotton. And what does all of that mean to you? Well, it means that you can sleep well in Koyuchi's crisp, cool, luxuriously soft sheets that are ethically made and made with you in mind. Live well, sleep well with Koyuchi. And now during our Memorial Day sale event, you can enjoy 20% off organic cotton sheets, towels, and everything else at Koyuchi.com. That's Koyuchi.com for 20% off from now until May 25th. Koyuchi.com.
The thing that I'm looking at and the thing that I'm hearing is it is just another brick in the wall of why people are not happy with the Trump administration and the Republican Party.
I'm Jeremy Hobson, and this is the follow-up, our weekly podcast. You can only get here on the Middle podcast feed. And just a reminder to rate this podcast, 5 stars, of course, write us a review. Today, we are following up on the Epstein Files. We asked on the show if they matter to you as a voter, as more and more revelations come out involving very powerful people, including President Trump. Joining us today is someone who recently broke one of the big developments in this story, NPR political reporter Stephen Fowler. Stephen, it's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Well, first, just tell our audience what you and others at NPR found that ended up being a huge story picked up all over the place.
3 million pages is a lot of pages of documents. And so it's kind of like the metaphor, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? And as we're going through these documents, we found a Justice Department PowerPoint summary of the case against Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And as we were looking through, there was a slide that mentioned prominent names. At the top of the prominent names was President Trump. And in those prominent names, there were 2 accusations mentioned. And one of them was very graphic, alleging that President Trump in the past forced himself upon a woman who was a teenager at the time and forced oral sex and reacted violently when she bit him. And it was strange to us that the only other place that information was found in the files that we could find searching for related terms was just one email from the FBI listing all of these different claims made against Trump and the various steps that they took to investigate it. Many of them were unfounded, uncorroborated. They had notes of people that they were never able to contact. But this one referred to a field office for further investigation. And so we knew there was the beginning of a story, that there was a tip called in that mentioned these things. We knew there was sort of an end of the story in that it made it to this PowerPoint, but there was a giant big hole of information in the middle.
And just to remind everybody, the law that Congress passed and that President Trump signed made it illegal for the Justice Department to withhold anything if it was just to keep people from being embarrassed.
There were a few things in the law mentioning ways that information could be redacted or withheld. The redactions had to do with victim privacy or if it was a matter of national security or some of the other things. And same with documents being withheld. I mean, the Justice Department said it could be withheld if it was privileged information, if it was part of an ongoing federal investigation, or if it was duplicates. And when we asked about these documents the first time, members of Congress also asked, and they said there's nothing that appears to be privileged about these interviews because one of the 4 interviews we found was published for the first tranche of files. They said that it doesn't seem that there was an ongoing federal investigation because the Justice Department said there were no investigations and new charges happening, and you can't duplicate something that exists 0 times. So we had questions. members of Congress had questions, and then eventually we got to this point where the Justice Department said that they were reviewing things, and if they found something mistakenly flagged as duplicate, then of course they would release it, and release it they did.
They did release it just the other day. Did you learn anything from that release?
Well, we got to see what the FBI put down from these interviews. There were 3 additional interviews with this woman who talked about what happened 4 decades ago in great detail about accusations against Jeffrey Epstein, her childhood, family situations, and the accusations against President Trump that were very graphic in detail. And there was another part of the interview where she mentioned other experiences with Trump but didn't want to go into it. And then in this 4th and final interview, there were conversations with the agents where she basically asked, what's the point of talking about these things and of trying to share this if nothing could be done, because this allegations happened in the 80s. So in some ways we got more information, but in others there was even less because there's no context, and we still found that there are dozens of pages that were part of this file that still haven't been made public.
Still haven't been released. And just to be clear, these are just allegations, but what does it say that the FBI interviewed this woman 4 times?
It says something. We don't exactly know what it says because we're still missing those pieces. We do know there have been no criminal charges filed against President Trump for anything related to Epstein. We do know, based on other documents in the files, that there was an FBI email talking about prominent names that had a hit in the Epstein case file, and it said for Trump there was an accuser who ultimately refused to cooperate. We aren't 100% certain if those 2 are the same people because there's just so much context missing around these files, not just specifically around President Trump, but in general. There's just millions of pages of documents. It's kind of just raw data, raw sand in the sandbox, and there's no tool to sift through it. There's no table of contents. There's no notes or flags saying, yes, there are unverified salacious claims made, like the Justice Department said, but there's no indication which ones those are or what they did to find out. And so you're just left with members of the public and members of Congress trying to fill in the gaps. In some cases, not being very successful or truthful in trying to do that.
Well, and one thing that we discovered when we opened up the phones is that members of the public do care a lot about this. We got a ton of voicemails after the show where all the lines were full. People do care. Listen to this one.
Hey, this is Adam calling from Denver. I'm a registered Republican. I did not vote for Trump this past election. However, I think going in, to these midterms and the next presidential election, definitely Epstein list will be a important thing for me when considering who to vote for. If someone's coming out saying, look, we're going to be way more transparent, we're going to drop names, we're going to unredact names, and we're going to arrest some people, hold some people accountable, obviously for me that would be a big thing.
So, Stephen, Adam, a registered Republican, one thing that has been interesting about this is how important this issue has been for a long time for the Republican base, which is why there was bipartisan agreement that the Justice Department should release all these files.
The reason we got to this point is because of President Trump and promises he made on the campaign trail when he was running for office in 2024. The Epstein Files were part of this campaign message that there were a number of things the federal government did or said that contributed to this image of, the federal government is hiding the truth from you about the Epstein Files or other things like that. And if you elect Trump, he said that he would, expose the deep state and expose the truth. And the evolution of release the Epstein Files to at a certain point last year, he was saying that Republicans who talked about it were dumb and he insulted them. It led to a very high-profile split between Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Georgia congresswoman who resigned from Congress in part because of the falling out. And so the shifting message to Republicans and to people who have concerns about child sex trafficking and sexual abuse and powerful people covering up that. It became a situation where Trump was the powerful person in government keeping the truth from the Americans. And so it was a visceral shift in how people viewed Trump and what he said in a way that we haven't seen much in the last decade of politics.
Yeah, and it gets to a point that came up again and again for us, which is, Trump did run on kind of like the ordinary person against the elites. And this story, the Epstein Files, really bring out the idea that there's a different set of rules for the powerful versus everybody else. Listen to this caller.
My name is Jim. I'm in Fort Worth, Texas. Everything related to the Epstein Files doesn't matter. None of it's mattered since the Hollywood tape came out, since the other very well-known things about Donald Trump, about Ken Paxton, about Kristi Noem. None of that matters anymore. All of this is part of the Steve Bannon flooding the zone, because the ultimate goal is wealth and accumulation of wealth by the Trump family, while all these other things are going on as distractions. That's the big picture. If there's enough money, it doesn't matter what Trump and Epstein were doing.
You can hear that right there, Stephen, that people just feel like this is the powerful are not held to the same standard.
You've heard it a lot with members of Congress, fewer Republicans, but, Congressman Ro Khanna, the Democrat from California, who's been one of the key people pushing for the releasing of the files. Senator John Ossoff, who's on the ballot in Georgia in November, held a rally recently where he also talked about the same thing Khanna mentioned, of this idea of the Epstein class. And it's been something that's been a political shorthand for a lot of different issues. There is the narrow, specific allegations and narrow, specific things about sexual abuse and powerful people and what they knew and when they knew it and how they knew it. But you also touch on the economic side of things. You have Epstein, who cultivated people in academia, in healthcare, and all of these other industries and people around the world. And so it's not this story about one man and many years and many accusations has become a broader stand-in for the way a lot of people feel about the current state of politics and the current state of the economy. And so I think it has caught on in a way that maybe other similar things like that caller mentioned maybe haven't in the past.
One thing I do want to ask you about is, how do you make sure, though, because a lot of this is allegation and hasn't been proven. We had a listener, Christian, who wrote in from Pittsburgh. The prevailing opinion that anyone who ever spoke with Epstein is guilty by association betrays the abandonment of the democratic value of due process. How do you be careful in your reporting about this not to make the link when it hasn't been made, in a court of law, for example?
The story that we did was very narrowly and specifically about documents that should have been made public under the Epstein Files Transparency Act that were not. And then the follow-up was that these documents happened to be about President Trump. This story was very carefully written and done. The way other people talked about this story was beyond our control and was maybe not as carefully done. But, we asked the Justice Department multiple times for explanation and comment before we published a story, after we published a story with the follow-ups. We asked the White House. We, asked for their clarification and comment on a number of things. And the White House this whole time has said that President Trump is, quote, totally exonerated when it comes to the Epstein files, when it comes to his relationship with Epstein. When these documents came out, they said that they were baseless accusations and launched personal attacks against the woman who made these claims. And so, we are very careful in what we look at and how we look at it to make sure that we are not drawing conclusions that are not supported by the documents. And I think as a case in point, you saw members of Congress that were able to go and view unredacted files there was an instance with Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie where they said that there were powerful men named and they were redacted and they shouldn't have been, and the Justice Department unredacted those names and they read them out on the floor, and it comes to find out that they were random men added to fill out a lineup. And so So even members of Congress, even people who have staff and have the due diligence and have access to things that the average person doesn't, still made those leaps. And so we are very careful in what we do and how we do it so that we're not contributing to that, because we are going based on what the documents say, what we can fact check and verify ourselves.
All right, we'll stand by, because in a minute we're going to be talking about what kind of an impact the Epstein Files could have on the midterm elections. The follow-up with NPR's Stephen Fowler will be right back. Welcome back to The Follow-Up. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I'm joined by NPR political reporter Stephen Fowler. Stephen, our question in the show related to the midterm elections, we asked whether the revelations matter to people as voters. Is this going to be something that they vote on? We've asked that question in the past about abortion, about the war in Israel and Gaza. Listen to this voicemail that came in.
My name is Jessica. I am 48 years old. I live in the state of Wisconsin. And I will say that as a woman and a mother of 3 daughters, there is absolutely no way that I would not demand for the release of the Epstein Files. For far too long, women have been treated unfairly and unequally. So yes, it's very important to me. And I have been emailing my state representatives for weeks and weeks. So it's a big concern for me.
Stephen, as you know, as you've been covering the last few election cycles, women have played a very big role in them. What do you think in this case, when you think about the personal experiences that so many people have had with sexual abuse in this country, how this is going to play out in the elections?
I think it's important to remember and consider the environment that we're in the sense that in a midterm election, there's less turnout than a presidential election. It's broadly a referendum on the party in power. There is a backlash against the party in power. In this case, it's Republicans. And Donald Trump is not going to be on the ballot. And we have seen in midterm elections prior the sort of effect that has had. And you have two ends of the spectrum at play here. One, you have the risk and concern that Republicans have that a lot of people that support Trump show up when he's on the ballot, like what he has to say, won't show up because it's a midterm election. But you have something like this that is an important priority to a lot of those voters, and they feel like the president hasn't done what he's promised. That may further accelerate that vote with the couch instead of showing up. On the other side of things, you have seen the handling of the Epstein Files from the early days of the Attorney General giving a bunch of influencers a binder saying Epstein Files Part 1 that turned out to be just previously published information, all the way down to this, just sort of built in as one of many things that people cite, Democrats, independents, people that maybe voted for the Republican Party in 2024 because they weren't happy with the Democratic Party. Now they're saying they're not happy with the Republican Party. There certainly will be an element of people that the Epstein Files, what's in them, the revelations, the people who have stepped down from their jobs or lost their jobs because of their friendships and relationships with Epstein were in there. That will be a motivating factor because voters are complicated. Voters have different things that motivate them to make their choices. But the thing that I'm looking at and the thing that I'm hearing is it is just another brick in the wall of why people are not happy with the Trump administration and the Republican Party.
Well, let's get to one more point that came in from some of our listeners. Listen to this.
My name is Oliver. I'm calling from Richmond, Virginia, and I think that the Epstein Files definitely matter for the election. And my number one reason that the Epstein Files matter is because if this president is willing to start bombing countries indiscriminately to get eyes off of the Epstein Files, it doesn't seem like Iran is going to work. So what would be next? Will it be an all-out nuclear war to get out from underneath the Epstein Files? Or, what can we expect next?
Stephen, there is literally a movie, you've probably seen it, called Wag the Dog, about starting a war to distract from a sex scandal. Did this come up in your reporting, the president trying to change the subject from something that could be embarrassing to him, that involves him in some ways?
There's a lot happening. Every day there are easily 5 to 6 different storylines that should and could and do dominate the headlines and the attention of people on TV, radio, social media, you name it. I think when covering the state of politics right now, and also people consuming, there is a certain amount of walking and chewing multiple pieces of gum at the same time. Mm-hmm. There have been a lot of time and effort and things that have gone into the law for the Epstein Files and the deadline that the Justice Department didn't meet, and then the final things being met. The timing of this is the timing of just how long it took to find this reporting and story and put it together. The first piece published the morning of the State of the Union, I saw people online say, oh, this is going to distract against the State of the Union, or it's a distraction. There's not necessarily distractions when it comes to big news in politics. The war in Iran is something that is a major event. And the Justice Department's handling of the Epstein Files is a major event. And the ongoing fight over tariffs in the economy is a major event. And so, there aren't necessarily things that I think the White House is doing to distract from one or the other. I mean, they are very committed to the war in Iran and the answers. I mean, the president has called many reporters at many outlets and offered his thoughts over things. We also saw the ouster of the Department of Homeland Security secretary, because of events that happened there. So, I would not necessarily say that any one thing or many things that a White House does can distract, especially in this information era where everybody's always on. But it is something that I have seen a lot online in particular, of the narrative of, Iran distracting from the files, distracting from tariffs, distracting from so on and so forth.
But what about you as a reporter? Do you have a trouble sometimes saying, I've got to focus on this Epstein story, and the editor's coming down to me, well, we've got to have you do this other thing because there's this big, the war in Iran is happening. We need to know what's going on there, or something like that?
I mean, look, you have to wear many hats and you have to juggle many things. While this Epstein story was going on, I was also doing reporting on the Texas and North Carolina primaries that happened last Tuesday. You know, everything is related to a certain extent and degree, but I personally don't view any additional news cycle or development as a distraction from one thing, because there is a war going on and there is a lot of coverage of the war. There are a lot of stories and a lot of voices and a lot of things, but there are other things happening. And so as people were reporting on the war and the developments of things like that, we were reporting on the files that were missing and that were then later published. And there's an election and there's other things going on. So I think it is a challenge at times trying to keep tabs on all of the things when everything is so intense all the time. But I think one advantage to radio in particular is that it's there for people when they can pick it up and when they can consume it, and it's not ephemeral. And so stories continue to have legs. There continue to be new developments. It's not just 30 seconds and you're done. Right.
This also reminds me of why I'm so happy that I only have to do 2 shows a week instead of 5 as I used to. Just the never-ending news cycle. It is exhausting. Stephen, you get to, on this podcast, make a prediction before you go. I don't want to steer you in one direction, but I am going to anyway, because I hope it's political, because you're such a great political reporter. Do you have a prediction for us about something?
Prediction. Well, let's see. I have a lot of thoughts about politics that I get to every day. I get to basically see predictions about the world and talk to people and see how they play out. I do have a sports related prediction though, because I'm a Falcons fan. There's this tenuous period right now where everybody's reporting on rumored free agency moves that are happening or not happening before they're official, and there's a lot of them that are fake. I saw one this morning that said that the Falcons were going to pick up Tua Tagovailoa from Miami now that he's been released. I predict and I hope that that does not happen, because I don't think that would be good for my team.
We should say, by the way, that you are, for people who are not watching this, that are just listening to this podcast, you are in Atlanta. You've been in Atlanta for a very long time. So obviously deeply committed to Atlanta sports as well.
For better or for worse, and it's usually for worse.
Okay. Stephen Fowler, political reporter for NPR. Stephen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening to The Follow-Up. It was produced by Harrison Patino. You can subscribe to us on Substack. It's listentothemiddle.substack.com. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I will talk to you soon.